Good evening. It is St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. It is not great weather outside, really cold and rainy. So I hope wherever you're at, you're dry and you're warm. Um, this is like my least favorite time of the year because spring will be, especially in Kansas, warm one day and cold the next. Um, and so right now my allergies are acting up. So I hope everyone will be able to. I hope I'll be able to make it through the video. Um, so if I sound a little weird, it's my allergies. But tonight we are continuing our series titling it Crossroads, where we're looking at the last week of Jesus' life, including the cross and his resurrection. And in these stories that we're looking at, every person that we were going to talk about is at a crossroad. They have to decide what they are going to do with Jesus. And as we read this, we have to remember that each of us are at the same crossroad they are. And we have to decide if we're going to follow Jesus even to the cross, or are we going to go down our own path. And so tonight, I really want to think about this idea of following at a distance. And we tend to do this in our own lives. One of our biggest things in our life right now is social media. And if you look at the aspect of social media, we tend to follow the famous celebrities, famous athletes, and it's as simple as clicking on a button and we can follow them, whether it's on Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or whatever. But many celebrities actually encourage their fans to follow them. Now, here's the thing. They prefer you to follow them at a distance. They don't want you knocking on their door. They're definitely not going to let you in if you do that. But then in other aspects of our lives, like when we're driving, you may see signs that say things like, keep a safe following distance. We're always encouraged not to get too close. But is following at a distance always the best choice? And so tonight's story comes from Mark chapter 14. I'm going to pick up, start in verse 53 and read to verse 72. I'm reading from the NIV. Feel free to follow along in whatever translation that you're comfortable with. But Mark says, they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they didn't find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements didn't agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands. Yet even their testimony didn't agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, prophecy. And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said, but he denied it. I don't understand or know what you're talking about, he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them. You are a Galilean. He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about." Immediately the rooster crowed a second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And he broke down and he wept. Just a few hours before this story, Peter is sitting at a table with Jesus and the disciples at the Last Supper, and he declared that he would never deny Christ. He said that he would die before he disowned Christ. Then, in the garden, soldiers came and arrested Jesus, and with a sword, Peter cut off the ear of a soldier to defend Jesus. He risked his life to stand up for Jesus, but Jesus told him to put away the sword, and Jesus went with the soldiers and eventually was crucified. What I don't understand in this story is Peter is willing to stand up for Jesus against a group of soldiers, and yet in the passage that we just read, he denied himself to a simple servant girl. And I'm thinking, well, how could he stand up against people who are so powerful and yet deny Jesus to someone so harmless as a servant girl? And if you think about it, the answer is in the verse we just read, or the verses that we just read, and it's in verse 54. See, Peter is following Jesus at a distance, and when he stood close to Jesus, he fought for him. But from a distance, it is easy to deny him. And if we're not careful, we can also wander away from God and begin following him at a distance. We can learn a lot from Peter's story to help us understand why a lot of times we do follow Jesus from a distance. And you might be thinking, well, what can cause us to do that? And I think the first thing is we stray and we lose that closeness that we had with him. When Jesus was arrested, fear came upon all of the disciples. In verse 50 of the story that we're reading, we didn't get to this part. It was just a couple verses before. But in verse 50, it says that all his disciples deserted Christ and fled. And that's everyone, including Peter. And it was easy for Peter to stay close to Jesus when he walked with Jesus every day. He'd get up in the morning and would be ready to see what he could learn from Jesus. Where is he going to go? What is Jesus going to do? And his relationship with Jesus was the most important thing. This all changed when Jesus was arrested, because in a matter of minutes, Peter went from walking closely with Jesus to then following him at a distance. And his focus was no longer on that relationship, on gaining insight from Jesus or building a relationship with him. It started to become more self-focused, and he started to stray away from Christ. And instead of walking next to Jesus, he starts to keep his distance. And really, if we're not careful, we can be in that same danger. And sadly, I think what has happened to us over the last year may have started that. If we lose our focus for even just a moment, like Peter did, we will quickly stray and we will lose that closeness that we had. And the reason we do that is because it leads us to point 2, and that is we try to blend into this world. If you look at verse 54 of the story we just read in Mark 14, it says, Peter followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards, and he warmed himself at the fire. Peter tried to be an undercover follower. He's trying to follow Jesus secretly. I think, yes, he cared, but at the same time, he's worn down, he's defeated, he's weak, he's vulnerable. He's following Jesus at a distance. He starts to become cold, so he's attracted to the warmth of the fire. Now, that fire was started by the enemy. Peter's problem was that he was in the wrong place with the wrong people, about to do the wrong thing. And when the passion in our heart begins to die, that fire that we had for Christ will grow cold. But here's the kicker. We're going to start looking somewhere else for warmth. When you hang out with the wrong people at the wrong place at the wrong time, it's only a matter of time until you do the wrong thing. And this is what's happening to Peter. Time by the enemy's fire drew Peter even further away from Jesus. And you look at how far Peter was really prepared to go to blend in. In verse 71, he began to call down curses and he swore to them, "I don't know this man you're talking about." Peter was prepared to use the most profane language because that added to the impression that he wasn't a follower of Jesus. He wanted to blend in. He didn't want anyone to notice him. He didn't want anyone to know that he had been with Jesus. And I think there are plenty of people like this today. We come to church, but when we leave, we spend the rest of the week trying to blend in, and we begin to kind of spend some time, if you want to say, at the enemy's fire. We try to convince people at church that we are walking close to Jesus, but we're also trying to convince people out there that we don't know who Jesus is. And the result is that we begin following Jesus at a distance. And you might be thinking, well, why does that matter? At least I'm following him. But God's desire is that we walk closely with him. In Luke 9, verse 23, what I read last week, it says that we have to deny ourselves, take up our cross daily, and follow him. A little later on in Luke 9, it tells of people who wanted to do a few things before following Jesus, and Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead, but don't look back now, and come follow me. In Luke 18, tells the story of the rich young ruler, and Jesus tells him, you have to sell everything and then follow him. God demands total commitment if we're going to follow him. Following him at a distance is not good enough because there's a danger when we follow him at a distance, and that danger is this: it's always going to lead to a denial. Peter seemed so committed to Jesus. He had left his business and his family behind. He had spent time every day with Jesus for 3.5 years. He was Jesus' most trusted disciple, but once he began to follow Jesus at a distance, everything changed, and he quickly began to deny even knowing him. And like Peter, you might be thinking, well, I'm never going to deny Christ, but you have to understand that following him at a distance is always going to lead to that. And maybe we're not verbally telling someone around us that we don't know him, but we deny him in so many other ways. Whether it's not reading our Bible, whether it's not inviting friends to church, whether it's, not praying or trying to hang out with the in crowd or seeking our own way, or we fail to be obedient, we're prideful. We get angry easily. We hold grudges. We forgive, but we don't forget. We deny Christ when we fail to deny ourselves. And if we follow Christ at a distance, we're going to deny him every day. So tonight, maybe the rest of this week, you need to look at your relationship, your walk with Christ. How close are you to him? Are you keeping your distance from him? Are you just keeping him close enough to convince yourself that you're really following, but far enough away that no one really knows that you're following him? And if you are that, then join the rest of us while we're at this crossroad together. And the question that you have to answer as well as everyone else is, are you going to follow Christ or are you going to walk away? There are discussion questions available in the email and in the description box of whichever platform you're watching this, whether it's Facebook or YouTube. I hope that you guys are having a great day, great evening. I hope that this is a blessing to you and your family, and I will see you guys next week.